Live now.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this important panel. Before we get into the meat of it, let's have everyone do some intros. Start with your name, what you do, and then kind of a personal touch, anything about how this has all impacted you personally, the current events, and what you've been doing to cope or help. Rebecca, do you want to go first as my co-facilitator?
Thank you. I hate going first.
Okay.
My name is Rebecca Wagner. I'm the executive director of Quorum, which is the LGBTQ plus and allied chamber of commerce here in Minnesota. And the impact has been deep. I am heartbroken. I am angry. I have gone through the burn it down phases and the let's figure out how to reform phases, and it's a moving target. And some of the ways that I have personally been able to help is that I have a lot of bandwidth, and so I have been having conversations with my white friends saying we have to make changes, and not calling people out but calling people in, for example, on Facebook, and having and being able to have those conversations that make change. And then there's the basic stuff like getting out and cleaning streets and doing food supply drives because lots of people are hurting right now. So taking all those steps, and it's just a beginning.
Right. Z, how about you?
My name is Zaylor Stout. I'm the founder of Zaylor Stout and Associates, which is an employment law firm located here in Minneapolis. I'm also the author of Our Gay History in 50 States, an LGBTQI plus history book highlighting significant people, places, and queer facts on a state-by-state basis. This has hit me hard because, each and every time one of these shootings happens, do you think, am I the one that could be next? Being a Black man in this country always puts you in a different category and position than others. And so, I've sought support by speaking with other members of the Black community. This one just hit us extremely hard because it's like, how many times can we scream at the top of our lungs for help in regard to this issue and nobody listens? So, I was finding after getting out of the paralysis phase, moving into the action phase would be, working with connecting people with resources and being on the ground, helping, Black-owned businesses that have been targeted, or being involved in the community watch to make sure that, we as community members are protecting those businesses that are still standing. And then, finding ways to be able to move forward. So encouraging dialogue and discussion, as Rebecca outlined.
Great. Alfonso, how about you?
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Alfonso Winker. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders and president of Team Dynamics. We are a national strategy firm based here in Minneapolis. We work with workplaces to examine their culture and behaviors to achieve race and gender equity goals. For me, I think rage and heartbreak have been at the sort of core emotions that I've been feeling. I have a lot of experience fundraising and in the philanthropic space. And so I've been organizing my people and organizing money, moving resources as fast as I can, really holding space for, as a person of color who isn't Black, holding space for other people of color who aren't Black, who wanna wrestle with, what does solidarity look like? What does anti-Blackness look like in our own communities? And then professionally, we've been supporting our clients to figure out how do they do three things. One is tell the truth. A Black man was murdered by police, and that's the result of structural racism and a legacy of white supremacy, right? One. The second is hold space for that truth telling, but also for their workers to talk about, how is this affecting them? And the third is then what are your actions going to look like beyond just holding that space? So that's what's been coming up for me.
Wonderful. How about you, Chad?
Hi, I'm Chad Campy. I run Flip Phone Events. We're an LGBTQ events group in the Twin Cities. We produce drag brunches, dance parties, and other things in town. This hit me really hard in ways that because it keeps on happening again and again and feeling so useless. What I've seen sort of my role is to listen and to amplify that often people forget to do. So really using the followings that we have had to sort of just share other people's stories and other people's information, then really band together to raise money. One of the things that I've been working on with a variety of other folks in the drag and the LGBTQ world, there is a group of 4 of us who really came together to just collect money fast and then figuring out where that money goes and where it needs to go. And so that's been one of the initiatives that I've been working on. But it's still listening, processing, and moving forward and anticipating a change. And there has to be a change now.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Seth Vbruck, founder and CEO of O8, and this has impacted me, like everyone, very deeply. And just making sure everyone's okay. Information is out there. Anything I can do to disseminate information, but also focusing on what leverage I have. Which is why we're doing this here, to talk to businesses and then hopefully create some sort of playbook and repurposable content that other folks can use for free. Open source kind of mentality. So with that, what's going on right now? So folks have given a bit of a context, but also nodding to the fact that it's Pride Month now. There's a lot going on, and some companies might be wondering what to do. All levels, from the diversity and inclusion to marketers to C-level folks. So our goal is to help folks understand some things that they can do. So, and of course there are those smaller businesses which were damaged, and some larger companies are donating to rebuilding funds and things like that. And I would encourage them to continue to do so. So with that current context, as a company right now, is donating and making a press release enough, or even just a press release or a Twitter, you see Amazon's Twitter message out there and all the comments. Why not? And what do you think, consumers and employees will expect from companies in the long run?
Alfonso.
Enough is an interesting word. I think everybody's asking themselves for what enough is. I think I'm less interested in the statement critique, and I think I come all the way back to the truth. So you need to be having a conversation with your workers about the truth of the reality that we live in, and then ask yourself, in this context, is there a relevant or related way to show up that I don't want to say aligns, but that is connected to whatever it is you do as a business. So you do a thing already in your work. And so what is it with your product, with your service, or with your content you can do to advance conversations about racism? So there's the internal work of not going around business as usual, like not pretending like we aren't in the middle of an uprising in our country and that we need to face the facts and face the truth, right? And then there's your external work, so product, service, content, whatever it is you do, draw that link. And I would say, don't issue a statement if you're not ready to tell the truth. So if you can't say racism, if you can't say Black, then don't say anything.
And just a reminder as we go on here, folks in the audience, you can submit questions if you're on the webinar through the chat and also on Facebook as we go along. Anyone else want to comment on that?
No, what I wanted to throw out there is that, people can sniff out inauthenticity. And so being authentic and being, forthright in regards to what it is you're going to do. Alfonso really hit the nail on the head there, but for example, I heard Ben & Jerry's had a statement that came out. I don't have to read it to know that Ben & Jerry's is right there, because that's part of who they are. That's part of their culture. They speak out all the time. Right. I saw on LinkedIn, there was a message that was sent out, 100 LGBT organizations, stand, against racism and all this kinds of stuff. Right. And you look in there to see if is your state's LGBT organization on there? What statement do they have on their page? How long have they been involved in this process? Is this the first time they've stepped out and said something about this when Black Lives Matter has been protesting at Pride for years and years and years across the country? Those are the things that show whether you're really authentic in regard to this issue or not. And yes, we welcome folks that are just realizing that there's this issue and this problem. But not being able to name it shows that the foundation is still not there in regards to you having that full apologetic support of those that are being impacted and have been being impacted.
I would also say listening is such a big piece as a white person too, of just sitting back, listening and processing and not getting defensive. And you see a lot of places defending past actions or not really fully taking it in. And I think that's a huge part, is that we all are learning that there's every white person, there's implicit racism built into us, and how can you be an anti-racist instead of not a racist? And I think that's one big thing that people don't always understand, and businesses really jump at it. And so it's really figuring out how to create that plan to move forward from here, and whose voices are we amplifying and whose voices are we sharing.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Rebecca?
I will add that what we've been doing is not working. Business as usual is not working. I know that I am part of an organization that we have a lot of people at a lot of various points in this journey, and learning how to not be racist, and learning how to be specifically anti-racist, and learning how to amplify voices. And I know that journey is starting because of this. And I also think that, as we move forward, one of the other things that businesses can do beyond putting out a tweet, and we love tweets, but actually doing the real work of looking at unconscious bias in hiring and sourcing products, looking at developing leadership paths, true and authentic leadership paths, specifically for people of color, right? And we can talk about that more. And really transforming how we do education and how white people talk to each other about this, and moving forward with that. So I could go on and on, but
love it. So it's maybe hard for some of us to process history as it's happening, but this is a pivotal moment in our history. What do you think consumers and employees will expect from companies in the long run? More tweets, right?
Authenticity.
Yeah.
Authenticity.
And I mean, I think the big thing that people are worried about are losing, like, what if I lose customers if I say Black Lives Matter, or defund the police? Those are customers you don't want anyway, which is, I think, is the big discussion, that these are people that, at least with our mission, we don't want them attending our shows. If people are supportive of this and don't see the bigger picture, there's plenty of other people who are, and say goodbye to those people.
Absolutely. And I think it's, some people see it as political, but it's a human rights issue, right? Like, it's not about politics. This is new.
We often tell our clients, being queer, being a person of color, being Black, we are not inherently political. We've been politicized.
There you go.
So the right has decided to politicize us and use us as wedges, as pawns, as excuses, and as scapegoats. And so for any company to get into that mindset of, we're being divisive, is murdering unarmed, innocent people okay or not okay to you?
Yeah.
And so
it should be pretty easy for them to answer that.
It's a pretty easy question.
Mm-hmm. And how do companies to follow that up? How are companies acknowledging and amplifying that truth, right? Like, how people will remember which companies are, like Zayla said, people will remember which companies are standing up and saying, no, we are starting this ally journey, and it is messy, and it is crucial, and it is painful, and it is beautiful. And there's that. And really intentionally looking inward about building allyship and authentic relationships.
Beautiful. Well said. Okay, now shifting a little bit, but not so much. What about Pride Month? People are probably wondering, okay, there's a lot going on as a company, you know, how do I respond to these simultaneous things? Does someone want to talk about the intersectionality here and what businesses can do to support both things?
All right, I guess I'll jump in since I just had a talk yesterday on a Facebook Live, specifically talking about, can Black people who are LGBT or part of the LGBT community celebrate Pride, and is there anything to be proud of in this moment? And some of that relates to, who's standing up for us, right? Who's speaking up? Who's at the table? Is it a small section of the LGBT community? Is it a broader section of the community? And when you're looking at companies as well, there's I think it's the pink washing. I forget the actual term that folks have with where, they just show up at Pride, they throw out the beads and the candy and stuff. And then any other, the other 11 months, they can't be anywhere to be found, aren't involved in any type of advocacy, aren't, moving forward in regards to their internal policies in regards to access and equity and all those different types of things. So, I mean, we're all not one person. We're all not one thing. There's different layers to who we are, right? And understanding and recognizing that in your employees. It starts at home. So at companies, it's doing that and recognizing your employees. And then that creates a culture where your employees see that inherent, humanity and individuality in everybody else that they come in contact with. And so if the companies aren't willing to work and start with that, fundamental piece at home with their employees and understanding why do they have retention issues in regards to LGBT folks? Why do they have retention issues in regards to Black and brown folks? Why don't they have a lot of women and members of senior management? I mean, all of these things and all of these numbers and all these demographics this isn't new news, right? This isn't new news for us. And so again, it's being, forthright and intentional in regard to that so that when there are Pride events or when there are Black Lives Matter events, we can celebrate you and your accomplishments because we've watched you on this journey and you've allowed for us to be aware of where you started and we can track your progress.
And I think including the right people in the conversations, I know right now in LA, with LA Pride, they announced that they're going to merge with Black Lives Matter LA, but Black Lives Matter LA has said we never heard from Pride. And so making sure you are involving those people in those conversations before you jump out and say these different things and make sure the right people are there to lead. And I think that's the biggest mistake companies lead is by just putting out something quickly and without asking people beforehand. And I think putting those voices forward is really important.
And I'm originally from LA, so I know those relationships and know that those are the situations that are viewed extremely critically from folks that are from the Black community, let's say in LA, that know that it's not something that has always been inclusive, and there have always been issues and struggles with Black folks, and even in West Hollywood, right? And so, it's again that lip service as opposed to being true and authentically having that been part of your process and your evolution.
And I think for, us as queer folks, as a movement, this is an opportunity to actually return to our roots and return to our history, right? Mm-hmm. Trans women of color, Black trans women and drag queens are the founders of our movement, have always been on the cutting edge front lines of our movements. And I think as a community, Pride has gotten away from talking about the truth of that history. Mm-hmm. And so I think, and I'm not the first or only person saying that, right? But we can stop talking about Black folks, folks of color, and queer folks as separate. I'm a queer person of color. And so I want to talk at exactly the intersection of anti-LGBTQ sentiment, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and racism. I'm not interested in a brand or a workplace that can't hold that complexity. And so I think if companies are thinking of this as an either or, then it's time to school yourself in the history, because trans women of color have not been unclear about the exact intersection for decades. And for folks who don't know, some of the founders of Black Lives Matter are queer Black women.
Yeah.
Queer Black femmes were at the center of the organizing that founded the BLM chapter in Minneapolis. So folks in Black and brown communities who are queer have not been unclear about the connection. And so maybe it's time to companies to join that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things companies forget too, they make it seem like it's our work to tell the company what to do or how to do, but it is their work, and they need to compensate the people who they are asking to be part of the change. Because too often they say, oh, you're making just a public spectacle out of this. You tell us what to do better. It's not my company. It's not your company. I think it is bringing those people on board and making sure that they're there for a long time and having all those pieces put in place.
And I think I would add that this is an opportunity to build authentic relationships, less transactional relationships, but true, authentic relationships that are built on intention and humility and courage and the desire to truly create change. And it's obviously beyond one person. It's beyond any single individual. And Chad, I completely agree with you. As a white person, these are conversations I should be having. These are not conversations we need to put on the backs of people of color, saying, "Teach me," and I'm like, "Stop!" Right? That's not where the conversation should be heading. Sorry.
So building off that last question, we have a question from the audience from Fernando. Can you speak about transphobia in the Black community? What about your opinion on Black Lives Matter and the recent beating of trans women?
Well, it's not just transphobia, but it's homophobia as well. I would say that, the inability to accept individuals that are trans is not something that's uniquely Black. If we look at the full LGBTQI plus community, the bulk of the community is made up of gay and lesbians. How open and willing and accepting have they been of their trans community members, right? I'd say sadly, in regards to the Black community, a lot of the toxic masculinity and some of that going all the way back to slavery is what creates some of the problems that the Black community has in regards to Black men that are gay or individuals that are trans, because our men were emasculated, where they weren't able to defend their wives and defend their children when they were put on the auction block and sent away, or when the master came over and raped their wife, right? So if we want to be very honest, we need to have those very honest discussions in regard to that. And even though that was 400, 300 years ago, with Jim Crow and everything, it's still part of the system that results in how we interact with each other today. And so there is work within the Black community, and there has been work in the Black community, especially with Black leaders, some prominent Black leaders coming out and saying, hey, how can we be for equality for Black folks if we're not going to be demanding equality for all those that are disenfranchised, including those that are LGBT. But this is, this isn't an exclusively a Black issue. So I don't know if anybody else wanted to have any comments in regards to that.
And yeah, I was just going to say it's not specifically a Black issue. This is a people issue, that there are countless trans and non-binary folks who are murdered every week that we don't hear about, that their stories are not to the forefront. And I think as LGBTQ communities, it's our job to make sure people are hearing those stories and making sure that this stops.
Mm-hmm.
There's an article, Rebecca, read it go.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There's an article by Tama Okun and Kenneth Jones, which outlines 13 characteristics of white dominant or white supremacist culture that get into organizations. So even if you are not a member of the KKK, some of us behave in ways that uphold white dominant culture. And one of those characteristics is either or thinking. And either or thinking manifests in gender policing. in deciding that some bodies should perform in one way or another, and then deciding as humans, individual humans, that it's my job to enforce a gender binary. And that is exactly, for me, the intersection of violence and police brutality at the intersection of race and gender, because the role that folks take on is to decide where certain bodies should be. And I think I learned from M. Adams from Freedom Inc. in Wisconsin that part of what we're doing is, as a society, we're more threatened by Black masculinity. And then we're who gets to perform masculinities and femininities. So the conversations are not an either or, which racial group or which community is doing more gender violence. We're all doing gender violence, and we are accepting differently from different people what sort of gender performance we get to do, and then we decide it's on us to violently enforce a gender binary. And I think that is for all of us to undo. You know, why are we challenged by masculinity or femininity in a different way? And when we add the layer of race, I think there's a direct correlation between lightness and darkness of skin and who we let perform what.
Yeah.
And that violence is about putting people in their place, and that we think it's our job to do that.
If you look at popular media with RuPaul's Drag Race, how there's a ban of trans performers on that show, which makes no sense at all, or non-binary performers. That is often the culture that people look at into the LGBTQ world as it's popular on TV, and having that ban is enforces exactly what Alfonso was saying.
Great. We did get another question. This goes back to about 2 questions ago, but I think it's a great important question to answer. Is there a way to quantify an organization's authenticity or to certify the work that they have done in field diversity and inclusion? I think there are a few certifications out there for companies. Can you talk about it?
Rebecca,
do you know those?
Yeah, do you know?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I can mention is, I mean, there's the HRC, for example. I think everybody knows about the HRC. One of the challenges, I think, with the HRC is that the HRC is focused on organizations that have a national reach. And so that's not the majority of businesses that we have. And so it makes it challenging for us to find out of our regional businesses and our state businesses and our local businesses, you know, how LGBT friendly are they? What are their policies in regard to these things? I don't believe that there's currently a mechanism for us to be able to find out that information. So the difficult part is that then it's on us as individuals to just follow and track and all that kind of stuff. I hope, I keep my fingers crossed, that someday, you know, HRC will find a way to be able to have these regional assessments, because what it does is it encourages organizations to be better, to do better, and to be able to be on that type of index where it's very clear where it is that they stand. It makes it easier for consumers to be able to decide which organizations to support. I see that as a net win, and I see it as a loss for us because it puts that much more of a burden for consumers to be able to track down this information when there are already organizations and mechanisms to be able to do that. They just have to find the will to decide to not just look at the national reach, but also look at the regional and then state reach. And maybe that means that our individual state organizations, like Out Front, are the ones that find ways to be able to have that information and track that information, have it available for us. I don't know.
Or quorum. That should be our role, right? Like, and that's something that we've talked about on a not necessarily a hyper local, but a state of Minnesota region. I know that this has been an ongoing conversation across the country with these LGBTQ chambers of how do we quantify, how do we and is it, do people then need training? Are they, where are they on that journey? So it's not just here's a box that you can check, but how do we create true change?
Absolutely. All right, let's take it to a slightly different level. I know there are surely some tactical folks in the organization. We've been addressing a lot of leadership questions, which is wonderful. But, you know, there are folks like marketers or copywriters right now who have very specific tactical questions like, do I pause my ads? What, you know, how should my copy change? How should we talk about ourselves? Should that change? Should I refrain from posting? You know, do I incorporate, you know, BLM and pride messaging into our website, landing pages, emails, social media, you know, branding and identity? And these are all very tactical questions, which would require, you know, a longer webinar maybe to answer. But my thinking, and I want to hear what you think, folks, is, you know, the answer is more holistic than that and lies in kind of what we've been talking about. What have you done so far? You know, can you justify unpausing your ads when your organization hasn't done enough to be relevant right now? Or if, you know, if you haven't done enough as a company, what do you folks think about that?
I think going back, people can see your authenticity. So they can see with, especially if you're a Minneapolis-based company during this, if you are still posting your normal whatever on your page. Even personal too for leaders as well is another thing. I know that a big thing within the queer community is everything was happening in the Twin Cities. Everybody was figuring out what they can do. And then there are a few people who are putting pictures of them in a Speedo on the beach that same day. And that speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think really figuring out what that narrative is and what is that long-term plan and how your company or you yourself can be part of it is essential before even answering any of those questions.
Other thoughts?
You know, I think that the other piece about this is that I know that there's you know, I'm trying to frame an answer as I'm framing it. You know, I know that there's if people are putting out messages that say Black Lives Matter to check a box and are not doing it in an authentic way, then they are doing more harm than good. They're not doing the work. They're not being authentic. They're not amplifying voices, and yet, you know, they're like, but look, we put out this tweet. I hate tweets. We put out this tweet. I hate tweets, but you know, that's replicating the problem. And yes, there needs to be celebration. Like Alfonso said, Pride started as a riot.
Mm-hmm.
Where we can talk about that, right? It is not the binary of one or the other. And we know that people have intersectional identities and want to celebrate all of those identities and also stand up and burn it down. And we get to hold all those truths at the same time. I think that's the piece that I'm hoping that I'm trying to learn, that we can hold multiple truths at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yep. And, you know,
I think
oh, go ahead.
I think there's a couple of questions you can ask yourself about, you know, behaviors. I think you can ask yourself about motivations. So what's motivating me to do or not do something? You can ask yourself about assumptions. So what assumptions have I made about who's interacting with us, who I'm engaging with, and who is this for? And then I think folks in making their decisions need to also think about comfort. And so am I choosing to do or not do something, you know, through my company's channels for the maintenance of comfort and then whose comfort? My comfort, our executives' comfort, an assumption I made about who our audience is, and then accountability. So am I ready to, if I receive feedback or pushback, am I ready to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and here's how I'll do better next time? And so accountability doesn't mean you're in trouble and you're on the naughty list forever. Accountability means like, you just say like, oh shit, I was wrong. Yeah, full stop. And you don't even have to explain your intentions.
I also think too, checking in with your Black employees is a big piece if you have them, and not saying how are you, instead of rephrasing what can I do for you. Can I give you days off so you can go protest or be part of the movement so it doesn't affect your work? What can you do as a white ally to support those who are within your network? There's a lot companies can do. And I think that is probably one of the essential questions, because I'm sure it's very difficult for people who have to jump in and go to their job the next day if they were up all night protesting or they were up being medics. There's lots of different people doing it. So I think figuring out who is in your company and how you can help them is essential too, even before going to the next step.
Not giving a lip service, right?
Yeah.
So there's so I got a call from someone on Wednesday, and she had been tasked with leading a diversity listening session. She was tasked because she is the only lesbian in the company, and therefore she knew everything about diversity, according to her boss, right? Like, and she's like, I am entirely ill-equipped to do this. So we spent 2 hours talking through basics. I know, I see your face, Alfonso. Basics, right? And I think that that's happening more than not right now. People are desperate to say, what can I do? What can I do in my own space? How do I build this thing called allyship that I thought I already did, but I actually didn't because I'm just replicating the same thing. So now let's talk to Black folks and make them educate us, right? And so it was just like it was like an aha moment that it's time for square one conversations.
Yeah, and I would just say, this is my space from a messaging standpoint. You don't need to make one message and then be done. Tying in what everyone's talking about here, you can say, okay, we realized we have a lot to do. We have a lot to learn. We have a lot of people to listen to. Your message can be phased. I think there are a lot of people right now like, hey, you're the designated lesbian, therefore you know everything. Make a statement now and change all of our landing pages. You can make your messaging phased and holding accountability, like Alfonso's saying. You can phase it out because we should not be done, and it doesn't need to all, your messaging doesn't need to all come right now.
And I think a lot of companies say, oh, we're not in that business. But companies like Pokemon just put a statement out where they're donating $100,000 to Black Lives Matter and $100,000 to another company. Pokemon is, everybody plays, and all different types of people play Pokemon, but you have to just know that not because your business is not doing this work, every business is touched by what's going on, no matter what you do and who you serve.
So building off what you just said, Chad, we did get another question from Katie. I'm part of the LGBTQ+ community and a small business owner and wanted to genuinely give back and help during this time. I have set up a way for donations and help clean up when possible. Is there any other way that I can make a difference? I talk to clients and post on social media for awareness, but I want to do more.
Well, sometimes it's going to relate to what expertise it is that you have that you bring to the table, because all of us have different areas where we have our individual strengths. So I know that there's, law firms that are doing pro bono work to help the businesses that have either been looted or burned down or impacted, file their claims and fight their claims with the insurance companies if they don't want to provide it to them. I know that there's been issues that have been brought up in regards to some of the small businesses in areas of our city that tried to get insurance and were unable to get insurance because the agent said that we don't insure this part of the city because it's, mainly minority and there's a higher likelihood of this or that or the other happening. And so there's folks coming together, in the insurance industry and all these types of things that wouldn't necessarily think that they'd have something to offer here, but to create a task force to be able to attack and challenge this systemic issue and problems so that businesses moving forward will be able to be an equal footing than everybody else. So Katie, depending on the business that you're in and what type of individual expertise you as a business owner or your business can provide, there's always going to be a way to be able to help. The other thing that I want to make sure that I mention is, I know tons of people went out and cleaned up, tens of thousands. I was out there. I know many of you were out there as well, donating food and things of that nature. A lot of times there's that push initially, but then they forget as we move on. And so, these areas that don't have a grocery store because their grocery stores have been burned down and the liquor stores and the little bodegas have all been burned down. And now there's a food desert. They're going to need help moving forward, not just today when the news media is there and everything, but weeks and months down the line. And so there's not only that, but a lot of the people, let's say, that I saw helping in North Minneapolis, I don't normally see there. Right. And so the question is going to be is once these businesses come back, making a concerted effort to go and eat at these restaurants, to do business with those businesses over there. That's the stuff that makes a substantial difference as well. And so committing to that you know, committing to those Black businesses from that perspective is what's going to be able to help us move forward too.
And I'd layer onto that, Black-led organizations and organizers have not been unclear. There's at least 3 Google Docs that I know that are circulating. And so I'm not making any assumptions about how you identify Katie. I think sometimes this is for everybody. Sometimes we think I would want fill in the blank in a crisis, so I'm going to go do that thing. And I think it's really important. This, you know, we've been talking about listening and following the leadership of Black colleagues, Black employees, Black community members. The Google Doc lists are circulating. So it's take that lens that Z just said of like, what am I good at and what can I do? And is there a match on those lists? Reclaim the Black has put out a list of where to donate. Other organizations have put down, you know, here's all the different food drop-off sites. Other organizations have listed, here's actions you can take for your own personal development. So I would say the lists have been generated, and they've been generated by Black-led organizations, so take their lead.
And also make sure it's not just a photo op, which I've been seeing of people just like putting on their mask and bringing a broom, taking their pictures, and that's it. Which great, it's a double-edged sword because you want to amplify and get more people out so they see you're doing it, but it's not always about patting yourself on the back, in which I think a lot of white people like to do all the time. I've been guilty of it, everybody has. And so just really figuring out what and when you share. And so that's why I think making sure to amplify others' voices besides yours, but showing what you're doing to make a difference.
We call that disaster tourism. And the other piece that I would add is that we've also had a COVID issue now for 3 months. These businesses, I just sort of speak to what Zayla was saying earlier, was these businesses are already hard hit and haven't been able to be opened. There's huge economic challenges facing every community, but primarily communities of color, businesses of color, diverse businesses in general, especially the very small ones. And this is adding fuel to that moment. And so I strongly encourage people to not think about just now, but go to the list that Alfonso was talking about, because the need out there is far greater than we can possibly imagine. And this is building on a global pandemic. So keeping that in mind as well.
One simple way is something that we did at Flip Phone is working with drag performers, other LGBTQ folks. We set up a fund. It's called the MN Fund Hub. If you are on Instagram, it's a really easy, just Venmo your money. We've raised $100,000 so far, and that was all with amplification of all these different voices. And it's very transparent of the different Black-led orgs that we're giving the money to. And so something as simple as that of how you can use your voice and power to get money into the right hands.
Completely support.
Wonderful. Okay, you know, then taking it back to the larger companies with the company with the resources to do more. Is there anything that a company can do to stay relevant in the long run? You know, attracting and retaining talent, positioning oneself as a company that does good in the world and is attuned to the current reality, those kind of things.
I think when Target had the statement that came out initially, I think that people felt supported for that and saying we will build that in this neighborhood and we understand this is a process, and opposed to attacking. I've seen a business come out and said we're not going to be opening due to Black Lives Matters, Black Lives Matters arsonists and things like that, and that enraged the internet. So. Which is rightfully so. So you have to really make sure how you're saying it, what you're saying it, and run it past people, because I think a lot of people are just quick. And it's emotional. If you lose your business, you're emotional. But thinking of the bigger world and what to do from there.
And I also, I agree with that completely. And I also think, once again, intentional leadership development opportunities for people of color. One of the things that we see across the board at larger companies, at most, not everyone, but a large majority, is that, you know, they're great at recruiting, but there's no intentional space created for leadership development that's culturally specific or even relevant at times. And so then people began to drop out of leadership opportunities. And there's also not that conversation about unconscious bias, and that includes, like, that impacts hiring, that impacts promotion, that impacts you at every level of your career. And these are the things that companies can be doing, right? Like, they can talk about being allies, but I want to see what you're actually doing. How are you taking your ERGs to the next level? How are you showing up? How are you looking at every single one of your HR practices? Are you looking at every one of your internal strategies, your sourcing models? What are you doing? And I want to see that, because that tells me that not only are you going to be trying to be an aspiring ally to the LGBT communities, but to an aspiring ally to all the people of color and the communities, people with disabilities, and all of the other sort of myriad identities that we have, that we bring to the workplace every day.
I think there's an important reflection question for companies, and that is, what kind of economy do you want to be a part of? Do you want to be a part of an economy that allows LGBTQ, Black and brown people to thrive? Or do you want to be a part of an economy that kills Black and brown and LGBTQ people? And if you want to be a part of an economy where Black and brown and LGBTQ people thrive, then you need to move your money and not in those directions with, like Rebecca's saying, your hiring, but with all that you do. And so to have a deep analysis of your economic behavior and say, does your economic behavior uplift or hold back the communities that you claim you care about in those aforementioned tweets?
One other thing that I want to make sure that I add is, organizations, I think, especially it's a lot of the larger companies, focus on supporting the larger national LGBT organizations and not supporting the local organizations that are doing a lot of work that's actually on the ground. I mean, yes, there's a lot of political advocacy that happens on a national level, which is important for us to get the Equality Act passed and things of that nature. But we need help in the states too, right? We need help at the local county levels as well. And so I would really strongly encourage those companies, because I mean, these are large companies, are headquartered all over the country, right? To not only focus on supporting those large LGBT organizations, but also support the local organizations if it's where you're headquartered, right? And LGBT and queer and organizations that are owned and led by people of color as well. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be and as well. If you donating $50,000 to HRC, let's say, for example, as opposed to, $40,000 to HRC and $10,000 to a local organization, that $10,000 is going to have way much more of a significant impact on the lives of the people that you're really trying to help and benefit. And so I just want to put that challenge out to those organizations, because I know that there's a lot of organizations that are really consolidating where their giving is happening, and it seems to be more focused on the national aspect as opposed to local. Don't forget local. Don't forget local.
And can I add something to that, Z, really quick? Marketers, community affairs folks, philanthropic folks within companies, it is not your job to decide how much an organization can handle. Folks will know what to do with the big check when it comes. So if you think that small community organization couldn't handle a big check, that's about you trying to control Black and brown people, and controlling Black and brown people is the behavior of slave owners.
I also think companies and organizations should look at the relationship with police. And that's sort of the elephant in the room that we have not really been talking about. And what are they doing, and how are they helping to defund or change the police structures? Because that is the implicit reason why a lot of this is happening. And I think a lot of companies are scared to talk about it because they're going to offend police folks. And so just really looking at that, I know there's a local pizza place here that said that they're taking away the police discount. And so just checking out all the comments back and forth of people who are losing their business for that and such. And I think that's an important conversation to have as a company of what you do to support and what you do not to support the police.
Mm-hmm.
We've got about 9 minutes left, just to sort of keep us on track and just figuring out, are there any other questions sort of from the viewers or the audience that we want to make sure we touch on?
Yeah, I think a really great question that we've seen in different channels actually is just to elaborate more on any webinars, seminars, resources, websites, organizations, places people can go to get factual information and ways to help. Z, I know, or Alfonso, you mentioned Reclaim the Block. So is there any favorites out there that people can go to that are really reliable?
If you go to MN Fund Hub, it shows you the 6 organizations that we're focusing on that have been vetted, and that's a good list to just even start. I know that the Northside Business Fund is often getting overlooked. That Lake Street has gotten a lot of money, but they're not close to their goal. Also, Midway in St. Paul, that neighborhood is also overlooked as well. So I think those are great places to begin. So if you go to that Instagram, there's a list to start with, and then going to those organizations share as well.
I've seen lists all over the place and not necessarily in one consolidated place, and I'm sure the other panelists have as well. So if we have the ability to include those lists in the event page so that people can, see those resources, because I know folks have been asking about reading lists and all these different types of things, and having, I haven't necessarily seen one place. I've just kind of seen it all over the place. So if we can add those there for those that are watching this now or watching it later on, because I'm sure it's being archived. I see it being recorded. Then they'll have that ability to be able to search those resources as well.
And it's not going to be a single webinar. It's not going to be a single book. It's not going to be a single conversation. And I say that, and to all the other white people out there, this is a long journey that some of us are just beginning. Some of us are farther along in the journey, and there's lots of it out there already. This is not this problem. This content was not created yesterday. It is a journey, and there's a lot of content for people at every scale. So those 1.0 conversations, how do I talk about racism and how do I talk about privilege? There's a million of those. There's, then there's the 2.0 conversations about how do I take these back to my work or start with my family? How do I bring these conversations back to my family? There's a webinar for that. How do I then take this to my work? There's a webinar for that. And there's a million of them. One of the things that we've done is we know that NGLCC, so the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce members have been putting together a lot of really great small business webinars. So I know that, so Joe Woolley out of Nashville, for example, is just, he's like, this is what we're gonna do, and I know that those are being archived, and just tweet, Google, right? Like, let's just start with the Googles, and you will find things out there. And like I said, it's never gonna be just one, and I encourage you to watch them all and read all the books
and talk to people.
And talk to
the biggest piece, and make sure that the emotional labor, you're asking others that it's consensual, because I think that's the biggest part as white people sometimes, that you go and call your black friend, what am I supposed to do? I'm not a racist. Tell me I'm not a racist. And I can tell you, no one wants to hear that.
Nobody does.
Just really, I'll chime in on resources really quickly. If you want to start listening to something today, I just got a text a couple hours ago that Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, which is sort of a consolidated history of anti-Black and anti-Brown racism in America, that's free right now on Spotify, I believe. For white folks, especially the podcast that was produced from the group Seen on Radio, has a series called Seeing White. The episodes are 30 minutes each, so you can bust through that really fast. And then we actually just put out a resource today at Team Dynamics that is a guide for workplaces that want to figure out how to do the internal conversations of responding to a moment. It's not the full guide for how to, stop your legacy of racism at your organization, but it is how do you start getting honest in a moment.
Absolutely. And we will,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say,
We will transcribe this, and any resources anyone wants to post, even if you're not on the panel, attendees, feel free to post in the Facebook event. Any last thoughts, or Rebecca, anything we haven't covered? Or anyone
no,
else?
I think that this was amazing, and I want this to be the first of many of these, because I think we barely scratched the surface today. And thank you for putting this together. When you invited me, I was like, what? And but I think this is each of those questions could have been a whole hour just into themselves, and one of the things, and I know I've spent a lot of time talking to other white people today, and I'm doing that intentionally because it is on us to create this change that we need to see. It is not on our people of color, our brown and black friends. It is on us because we created this, and so therefore it is on us to begin to work to dismantle it. And I encourage people to not stop. Right, like, what are your intentional actions? Who are you talking to? What are you listening to? And once again, I know people have said this a lot, but how are you amplifying the message of authenticity from a place of humility, also knowing that these are courageous conversations?
Well said. Beautiful. I think that's a great way to end it. Thank you so much for, first and foremost, the panelists for joining. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and thanks to everyone who attended. Let's get this message out to as many people as possible. Wonderful work. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay safe.
you.
Remember, self-care is essential.
Self-care is essential.
Absolutely.
Turns out. Take care.